Good morning. Good morning and good Sunday. I hope that this new day finds you well. My name is Leon Dunkley. I minister to the North Universalist Chapel Society, or to North Chapel here in Woodstock, Vermont. I am so glad to see you this morning. Today is Sunday, June the 7th, and the title of this morning's reflection is entitled Knee. To this service and to this good day, I bid you welcome. To all souls, I say good morning. It is good to be together. On Thursday afternoon in Minneapolis, they laid him down to rest. They laid him down to rest for the first time. There will be 4 ceremonies. There will be 4 times that George Floyd will be laid to rest. The first time was in Minneapolis. For the second time, it'll be in Rayford, North Carolina, where he was born. And for the third and fourth ceremonies, they will take place in Houston tomorrow and Tuesday. There are so many who need to love on George Floyd right now. We are honoring George Floyd all across the country and all around the world. The protests in East Jerusalem drew hundreds of people in his name. Students in Iran marched in COVID protective face masks over their hijabs, carrying enlarged photographs of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, carrying protest signs in 3 different languages, and chanting Black Lives Matter in a way that I had never thought possible. In Germany, a mural celebrating the life of George Floyd has been painted at the site where the old Berlin Wall used to stand. There is a young light breaking on this world. There is a young and brave light breaking. There's a song where I'd like to invite you to sing, but a little background on this song. There were 2 songs at the time in the early civil rights movement when it was trying to find its theme. And they were very related songs. The one that made it through was, of course, We Shall Overcome, which I'm going to invite you to sing in a moment. But the song that was related to it had an interesting verse that lends some tension to the music that we sing. Just know that one of the early incarnations of the theme of the civil rights movement imagined singing, "If in my heart I do not yield, then we shall overcome someday. If in my heart I do not yield." I would invite you to rise in body and spirit at this time and join in the singing of this morning's opening hymn, We Shall Overcome. This is the moment in our order of service for the sharing of joys and concerns. If you have a joy or a concern in your heart, I invite you to call it forth in your consciousness at this time, to hold it in your heart prayerfully and send its energy, send its light, send its heaviness, send its gravity over to North Chapel at this time. Let's imagine our joys and our concerns to be separate winds that will gather into a single sail that we will hold in community here at North Chapel, and we will hold it as a community in our hearts. This morning I light 5 candles, 4 for the names that are being honored, for the 4 people who are being honored on the front lawn of North Chapel today. That's Nina Pop, Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. I light a 5th candle for all of those unnamed who've lost their lives to police violence over the last years. And I will light a final candle for all that has been spoken and for all that remains in the silent sanctuary of our hearts. May we be forever grateful for these days we spend together, these days that have our names written upon them. For this, I will light one more candle. May we hold all of this in compassionate community as we enter a time of meditation and prayerfulness. There are 25 pages right before me. I wrote all day. I thought about it all night. I spent last night listening to the words of Al Sharpton as he delivered the eulogy in Minneapolis. I listened to what he said. I thought hard about what he said. And I fashioned many of his ideas into my remarks for this morning, into this morning's reflection. I'm nervous to do this, but I don't think I'm going to use the script, at least not as I intended to. I want to tell you a couple of stories. This is a difficult Sunday for me. It's difficult to preach in the aftermath of so visible a death, so obvious a death in Minneapolis, not far from where I used to live. I saw an African-American man lose his life beneath the knee of a police officer. I saw someone who I recognized losing his life at the tail end of a Minneapolis police car. Now, when I first got to Vermont, when I first came here a few years ago, I was invited to speak at the Rotary Club just across the way, just down the way, on the way towards South Woodstock, leaving from the Green. It was my first time there. I didn't really know where I was going, but I arrived in plenty of time, and I had prepared remarks, much as I have this morning, but once again, I didn't use them. They didn't really want any prepared remarks. They were much more casual than I thought that they would be. And I was much more nervous than I thought that I would be. But we got together, and it came time for me to say a few things. So I just told them a little bit about myself. I told them that I was a graduate from college in Boston, and then I'd gone on to get a degree in music and became a college professor, and then left academia to go into the ministry because I felt my heart's call to do that work more than being in the classroom, although I do imagine that at some point those two things will coincide or coalesce. In any case, I told them a little bit about myself, and at the end of the presentation, things got much easier, and I became much more comfortable because we started talking to each other, raising questions, asking things we wanted to know of one another. How long has the Rotary Club been around? Where did you say you came from? And one woman raised her hand and said, "Can I ask you a question about race?" And I said, yes. I appreciated the amount of respect that she was showing. And she said, "I don't understand why that quarterback in California is taking his knee during the playing of the national anthem. It seems disrespectful to me." And I spoke to her. I knew the question. I understood it. And I was glad to address the question in front of the whole Rotary Club. I did my best to explain the difficulty of how race functions in the United States and the invisibility of certain issues, our failure to address sort of long-term systemic issues over time. I tried to say that what I saw Colin Kaepernick doing was not something that was disrespectful. I saw him taking the knee as a gesture of respect and respectful disagreement and not obedience. It is far more respectful to respectfully express your dissent than it is to go along with something that you don't believe in. Colin Kaepernick knew about the violence that was brewing in our world, and he did not submit to it, not even for all of the money that he was getting. And he paid a great price for that. He has been all but expelled from the National Football League since the time that he took his knee. At that time, he said, he made a couple of statements about why he was doing what he did. He said, "People don't realize what's going on in this country. There are a lot of things that are going on that are unjust, things that people aren't being held accountable for. And that's something that needs to change. That's something that this country stands for. We stand for freedom, liberty, and justice for all." He said, "I'm not going to stand up and show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses Black people and people of color." Brave man. He said, when there is a significant change, and I feel like the flag represents what it is supposed to represent, and that this country is representing Black people in the way that they're supposed to, I will stand. I love what he said. I did my best to try to explain the gesture of the meaning of his gesture. I was sad to learn that it was seen as being disrespectful. I'm not surprised, though, considering what the media was saying at the time. There was an article that was written by a man named Scott Erickson, who published on Fox News an article that he called "NFL's Kaepernick Insults Americans and Law Enforcement Everywhere." That was the title. And he wrote in his opening line, "San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick ignited a social media firestorm on Saturday after he refused to stand during the playing of the national anthem before Friday night's preseason game against the Green Bay Packers." The next day, Fox News published another article, this one entitled, "Trump Calls Kaepernick's Refusal to Stand for the National Anthem Terrible." And that article began as follows. Republican presidential candidate, he was a candidate then, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump criticized the San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick on Monday, calling his refusal to stand for the national anthem a terrible thing. He suggested, that's the end of the quote, he suggested that Colin Kaepernick should, quote, try to find another country that might work for him in a better way. Only a day had passed since the news had broken on cable TV, and the presidential candidate was glibly suggesting expulsion. It's funny because I just read the other day that Roger Goodell, who is the commissioner for the National Football League, he just announced just this past Friday that his organization was wrong for not listening to the NFL football players earlier. It was a formal statement. He said, "We, the NFL, condemn racism and systemic oppression of Black people. We, the NFL, admit that we were wrong for not listening to the NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the NFL, believe Black lives matter," the NFL said. So more than a day has passed, and so far, no governmental official I know is suggesting that Commissioner Goodell should leave the country or is thinking of outsourcing the National Football League. So we're in a funny spot because what Colin Kaepernick did was a beautiful gesture and a respectful one. He bowed his head, he lifted his chin, and he went down on one knee. And in all of those actions, no matter how offensive they may have seemed to some, no one died. The 4 police officers in Minneapolis were not nearly as successful, not nearly as respectful in their gesture. Yet they, too, collectively, took a knee and took a life. It'll be a long time before I recover from what I saw on TV. I think it'll be a long time before we recover from what we saw on TV. To make political hay of what was genuinely a powerful gesture by Colin Kaepernick, and to miss the point of what he was saying 4 years ago, leads us to precisely where we are right now. I have a UCC colleague of mine, Robin, over in Thetford, who took me to school the other day. She said that violence and looting is what happens when you try to choke the human spirit. Violence and looting is what happens when you try to suffocate the spirit of life. Now, I've received some comments and some concerns about how we are reacting in various demonstrations across the country and around the world. I'm aware of some sabotaging energies, some agent provocateurs that may be out there making all things worse. But what I know is that this is a time to deeply listen to the genuine concerns that are all around us. To loot is to take goods or riches or treasures from an enemy with whom you are at war. So when we talk about looting, we are, by definition, imagining that Americans are enemies of other Americans, and that our current state of discomfort could somehow be described as war. Now, I think that that's a useful critique when it comes from the bottom up. And I think that's a terrible assault when it comes from the top down. We must be very careful with how we use power in this world. And if the powerful, or those who imagine themselves to be so, deem it necessary to order the military to fight against other Americans, we've reached a strange point in our history. Now, here's the inauthenticity. The inauthenticity is that George Floyd is not an anomaly. This is not the first time we've experienced this. We've seen it before many times. That's why there are 4 names outside, 4 names that symbolize many, many, many more names. I think what we are seeing now happens in a context. I think what we are seeing now has to do with the devaluing of human life and the broadcast of that moment of devaluing on the airways. It's in our bedrooms, in our living rooms, it's on our cell phones, it's on our computer screens. We've seen the image again and again, and we can dial it up at any time. This has a heartbreaking effect on us. This has a soul-breaking effect on us. So part of what I think we really need to do right now is to locate where that pain actually is. To quiet down and to try to feel that place in us that has been profoundly unsettled, deeply unsettled by what we've seen. And once we locate that place, if it's in the pit of our stomach, if it's in our hearts, if it's in our minds, if it gathers in our throats, wherever it occurs in our body or in our spirits, once we locate that pain, let's ask ourselves what we need to do to grieve it, to allow it to pass, and to allow ourselves to heal. Now, I have a friend who I don't know yet, who lives in Silver Spring, Maryland, where I used to serve. And 3 days after George Floyd died, he wrote a song. And the song that he wrote was called $20 Bill, because the police were after George because they thought that he had passed a counterfeit $20 bill. So I asked him if I could share this song with you this morning, and he agreed. He's recovering now. He's been struggling against cancer, so he's working through some chemo. Such a beautiful man. I can't capture the beauty of the song well enough. I tried. Only he can do it right now. But I can share the words with you, and the words were these. Some people die for honor. Some people die for love. Some people die while singing to the heavens above. Some people die believing in the cross on Calvary's hill. And some people die in the blink of an eye for a $20 bill. Some people go out in glory with the wind at their back. Some get to tell their own story and write their own epitaph. Sometimes you see it coming, and sometimes you don't until you run out of breath with a knee on your neck for a $20 bill. Brother, I never knew you. And now I never will. But I make this promise to you. I'll remember you still. So take, eat. Let this be our communion. It's time to break the bread. Do this in remembrance, just like the good book said. Sometimes the wine is a sacrament. Sometimes the blood is just spilled. And sometimes the law is the devil's last straw, and the future unfulfilled, like the dream they killed for a $20 bill. I didn't expect to be this emotional in an empty room. But that's a really hard poem to read. And I rehearsed it. So I'm a little bit mad at myself for not getting through it. But I trust you all, and I believe in us. So, I take heart in the fact that there are protests going on in every state in the country and all around the world. I listed them out, but it doesn't make sense to read them. I love that there are protests going on in New Zealand and in Australia. I love that they're happening in Iran. I love that they're happening in Nairobi and in Lagos, Nigeria. I love that they're happening in Brussels and in Paris and in Dublin and in Tel Aviv and in Haifa. And I love that they're happening in every state in our country. I love that we were gathered together just yesterday or 2 days ago on the green with a demonstration that was planned through the elementary school, and a young boy who's probably 8 or 9 years old. We're fighting back in what beautiful way we can. We're fighting back with every core and every aspect of our being. There's a young woman named Ani DeFranco who wrote a song called "Willing to Fight." I want to share these words with you and then close. Her words are these: I've got friends all over the country. I've got friends in other countries too. I've got friends I haven't met yet. I got friends I never knew. I've got lovers whose eyes I've only seen at a glance. I've got strangers for great-grandchildren, and I've got strangers for ancestors. It's been a long time coming, and it'll be a long time gone. And you've got your whole life to do something, and that's not very long. So why don't you give me a call when you're willing to fight for what you think is real and what you think is right. So stand up, my beloveds. Rise and fall to your knees. We must find a way that allows us to see beyond ourselves beyond our differences. We must find ways that allow us to see ourselves reflected in one another's eyes. We are not apart from one another. There's part of me that resides in you. There's part of each of you that resides in me. We must allow ourselves to heal our bodies and our souls. We must become unbroken and whole again. Everywhere around us, there is the beauty that sustains the good and healthy life. Submit not to the warring energies that subjugate and suffocate and kill, but to the infinitely peaceful and loving energy that is far beyond us. Lend your heart entirely to love and see what happens next. I learned this gesture from my new and most favorite poet in all the world, George Floyd's daughter, Gianna. She said, "My daddy changed the world." And she's right. 6 years old. This is what she said, but her poem is her unbroken joy of life. May we find such grace within us, and when we fail, may we reach for it lovingly in one another, for the good of all, in fiercest resistance, and with a love that knows no bounds. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
Working hard to feed the poor and hungry children when every single one is strong and healthy, safe and warm. Only then will we find Silong Mabele.